Hello all, I hope you're doing well today. There are some topics on YouTube which famously are very controversial. They might get you demonetized or even your channel banned. One of those is saying something edgy about Israel. You have to be very careful on that topic. It's also like whacking a hornet's nest. I've noticed even when I've broached this topic even gently before, in the comments, the same comment section, you'll be called an anti-Semite and a cock to Israel, which shows the strength of feeling around this issue. But in truth, I've never been that invested in or that knowledgeable about the whole Israel-Palestine thing. I suppose historically, back in the day, I would have edged more with sympathy to Israel simply because of seeing what Islam can be like in the Western world. However, I think in recent years I've become more Israel skeptical for reasons we'll get into. I should say from the top for the powers that be that I bear no innate animosity towards any group in the world. I do believe we're all children of God, though I do believe all groups are distinct. Now those differences between groups aren't excuse for cruelty. In fact, those differences I think should be met with justice, compassion and love, but they are differences that I think need to be acknowledged for a balanced and a just world. Now, personally, I see this as the most logical, ethical and compassionate position to take in the modern world. But as we'll see, many people promote utopian worldviews, but don't actually stand by them themselves. In fact, they're quite hypocritical, and I think this is why many people are starting to question some of the official narratives. Now, in order to contextualise this correctly, we need to understand the epoch we're in. As I've said before, we're living in uncertain times. Many of us in the Western world are looking on our future with trepidation. But from an objective historical point of view, they're actually very interesting times. And this is because we are now at the beginning of a massive generational and geopolitical shift. In the Western world, the liberal boomers are starting to die out, get old, retire, that sort of thing. And it means that the cultural zeitgeist is starting to shift away from the post-World War II liberal mythology. On the geopolitical scale, America's dominance is now being challenged. I think most obviously we could point to Russia here. Would they really have made the moves they've made in Ukraine 10 years ago? Now, the Russians knew they could only make such a move if they were going to get backing from the different power centres around the world, or at least neutrality from them. This is specifically true with regards to China. Now, I believe that we've underestimated the Chinese somewhat in the Western world. We thought, well, they're commies, they're stuck in a bygone era. But in reality, their system isn't really strictly communist. They're doing things their own way and they're going from strength to strength. Yes, the Chinese can still be quite brutal. They wouldn't have many qualms about sending 1 million of their own men out to die in order to defend the country. They also wouldn't mind millions of their own people working in sweatshops and these horrible manufacturing factories. But on the flip side, it needs to be said that many of those Chinese would willingly die for their nation. They still believe in ideas of people and nation and so on. They've also maintained a relative homogeneity. And of course, because of this, they haven't had the madness of multiculturalism and mass immigration undermining their nation as the Western countries have, and they have a giant manufacturing base. Not to mention, many of their banks are state-owned. This may be a source for mockery from the free market libertarians, but in the globalist era, is it really so unwise? After all, they can escape the grip of money power now. Now, the rising power of China not only challenges the US on the geopolitical level, it also challenges the zeitgeist, the mythology that the USA puts forth into the Western world. This mythology goes something like, we've reached the quote, end of history. Liberalism has proved itself to be the only viable system left. We are now in a secular, rational, post-religious, post-ethnic age where man's needs can be satisfied by materialism and science alone. We now live in a world where your worth can be boiled down to your economic output and your status therein, and also your spiritual needs can only be met by your fidelity to the governing ideology of the age, equality and diversity. Yet instead of turning the West into a utopia, it's turning into a dystopia for many young Western people. And this is because they can feel a tangible sense of meaninglessness, of nihilism. And worse still, the liberal multicultural ideology isn't exactly working either. Many of the more perspicacious amongst our young have noted that it essentially means identity for thee, but not for me. Now, such a worldview was easier to take on board for the liberal boomers because they can embrace the lovely ideology and music of the 1960s while still having the solid foundation of traditional Britain, traditional Europe of their parents to fall back onto. Yet many youngsters are entering the workforce today competing with a global marketplace. People who are just as British as them, even if they arrived only a couple of years ago. They might even get fired if they question that. To compound matters, the boomer CEO, who's now made his millions, isn't interested in young Western white lads. That could be bigoted. He wants a diverse workforce, which is good for business and good for advertising. And if they can break free of the endless liberal propaganda, many young people realise that they come out of university saddled with debt, a debt that they're never going to pay off in their lifetime, they're never going to own a home, it's really difficult to get a decent job, and they're being made minorities in their own towns and cities, while they're refused an identity because that would be evil, but they have to celebrate the identities of the people coming in. No wonder then that the millennials, and especially the Zoomers on the right wing, are establishing more of an earthy English identity in their politics. Now, what's interesting about this is I saw a write-up on the content creator Morgoth's Substack about an incident at the Roger Scruton Foundation, essentially where some younger Zoomers really disagreed with the conservative old guard about the nature of Englishness. Now, at said event, the younger right wing were very eager to express that a core element of Englishness was ethnicity. Remember the world they've grown up in. They want an identity too. They don't want to be erased. However, for the old guard, this is seen as, the far right, as sort of an evil turn back to unthinking tribalism. Now, this led Robert Toombs, who was at the centre of this in the Conservative Old Guard, to write a piece in the Telegraph stating being English is not a matter of your ancestry. Subtitle, those who seek to reduce our nationality to a question of race show they don't understand it. Now, in essence, Toombs is actually showing here that he doesn't understand what's going on. He's showing that he's basing his worldview on what is essentially a right-wing liberal frame. In essence, the moral assumption he's working from is that it's wrong to announce a core element of Englishness as ethnicity because it might not be inclusive to our new arrivals who can be indoctrinated into Englishness. However, he can only state that because he's basing it on a security he picked up in his generational luxury. Again, Toombs grew up in an England that was stable, homogenous, listening to literally, there'll always be an England. Youngsters don't think that way. They're seeing it disappear in front of their very eyes. And again, because the liberal mythology can only conceptualise a Westerner having an ethnic loyalty to their land as some far-right example of hatred, they don't understand what's going on. What's really happening is the morality is shifted, and many young people aren't doing this because they hate outside groups, it's because they feel they're being swamped. So when a boomer like Toombs says, well, look, everybody coming here, we'll just get them to read Kipling and recite the national anthem and it will all be fine, it misses the mark, just like when a boomer says to a young millennial or Zoomer, pull your boots up like I did when I was young and had to rough it, and you can make your way. The key point is, it's not that the boomer advice is necessarily wrong. Pulling your boots up, working hard, taking responsibility are good things. Just as it's good to familiarise yourself with the poetry and literature of your nation. The problem is that their advice doesn't map onto the experiences or the realities that young people face any longer. Now, when you bring all of this together, what you have is a generation of young people across the Western world now willing to slay the sacred cows of liberalism and rethink their worldview from the bottom up. And this is why we're seeing highly reactionary figures who've been banned off everything having popularity waves at the moment. Chief amongst these is someone like Nick Fuentes. He's extremely controversial, but he's very pro-Western, he's very pro-Christian tradition, he's very pro the European people, and he's gaining lots of popularity in his criticisms of the liberal system. Now, if Fuentes is famous for anything, it's for his criticisms of Israel, and especially the behaviour of what he describes or alleges as Zionist influence in the government of America. Now, for this, Fuentes is labelled a Nazi, he's not allowed on any social media, he's on X, I think Elon brought him back, he's not even allowed a bank account, I don't think. But what the mainstream doesn't realise with someone like Fuentes is how disaffected young Western people are, number one, and how they don't really buy into people being called Nazis anymore. We must remember that if you're young, white and right-wing, you will have been called a Nazi in the woke era for saying something like men and women are different, or it's okay to be white. Now, the reason I think this is so important to cover is because it exposes a very powerful split that's going on in the right, and it seems that more of the establishment right figures such as Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson have been on a bit of a mission to take Fuentes out, but every time they try and do that, Fuentes seems to come back stronger. Now, in a conversation with Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson made a bit of a faux pas. I am quite fond of Tucker Carlson, but I think he misstepped here. He basically called Fuentes a loser gay kid in his basement in Chicago. And of course, this is the issue with some of these older heads with millions of pounds. They will pertain to support a lot of the lost young men, but then call someone like Fuentes out, who's a bit of a hero to them. This leads Fuentes to really hit back and his adoring fans to make edits such as this.
But then when it comes to me, I'm one of the real disaffected white people. You want to talk about me and them? I am them. He says Nick Fuentes is leading all of the disaffected young white men. I am a disaffected young white man. I was a precocious, intelligent, young white college student who went to Boston University, who was pro-Trump and red-pilled by Trump and animated by Trump's message of America first. And I asked questions about Israel, and I was punished for it. I did it years before Tucker Carlson started talking about Israel last year. And I sacrificed, and I was targeted by the ADL, by the SPLC, by the federal government, by the conservative movement that both Candace and Tucker were a part of. He's lonely, he's weird, he lives in a basement. That's a lot of people because of the problems you claim to care about. Do you care about Klarna and people going into debt to order pizzas and home ownership being impossible? Or do you think that's a contemptible, low-status thing to be ridiculed and mocked? What is wrong with being from Chicago? What is wrong with being weird? What is wrong with living in your basement? I'm the inauthentic person. I am that person. I am a spokesman for the disaffected white man because I am one, and you two are not.
Now, whether you like or loathe Fuentes, whether you think he's right or wrong, whether you think he's evil or just misled, it's clear the guy is very articulate, and with an army of tech-savvy Zoomers behind him, they can make very powerful edits such as this, which get him an army of adoring fans. Personally, I don't watch enough of Fuentes' content to know whether deep down he's a good guy or a bad guy or not, but I can see why young people are increasingly drawn to him and why he's making waves at the moment. I mean, it's obvious that many young right-wingers who were very loyal to Trump feel let down by him and the MAGA movement, which has gone completely silent, in fact called them losers for being interested in the Epstein scandal, which Trump promised he'd release the files on. And while the people can see this is one of the most obvious cover-ups of all time, the mainstream media just make it worse, whether they're left or right, by parroting the same line about how Trump's suddenly a genius because he's taken everyone's attention away from the issue.
I would say that this is, from at least a political point of view, quickly turning into a dud of a story. What am I talking about here?
Which is wild.
Which is wild.
This has been for 3 weeks now.
Exactly. Take a look here. Google searches for Epstein down 89% versus just 3 weeks ago, falling through the floor. It is no longer the top term searched alongside Donald Trump's name. That's been trading off between Taros and Vladimir Putin, with obviously the meeting coming up later this week. But at this particular point, the American people's interest in this story, it's quickly becoming something of a nothing burger.
I mean, this is just such obvious propaganda. I mean, CNN are supposed to hate Trump, number one, but number two, the reason the Google searches have gone down so much is obviously because it was in the news cycle a while ago. It's been completely removed from it. That's why people aren't searching it anymore. And again, you can call Fuentes evil, call him an anti-Semite, maybe he is, I don't know. But the point is, this looks dodgy. And it's things like this that make young people question the power structure all the more. I'm sure some of them are a bit crazy and loony, but young people are starting to think, how does power really work? On your screen right now is Jonathan Greenblatt. He's the CEO of the ADL. Now, if you don't know what the ADL is, it's the Anti-Defamation League, founded in 1913 in America. It's supposedly an anti-hate organisation. Now, of course, it goes without saying, opposing hate and cruelty is a noble moral thing to do. But just like Hope Not Hate here in the UK, and the ADL is about 1,000 times the size and the power of that, many people are very cynical towards such organisations because they actually believe that they push for their own political wants and needs while undermining the cohesiveness of the nations they function in. In essence, while they start out ostensibly challenging hate, they eventually start pigeonholing any right-wing perspective into evil, far-right Nazism that must be persecuted and challenged. And the issue is, with someone like Jonathan Greenblatt, is people have started to question as to whether his loyalties really are to America and the health of it therein, or whether he's more loyal to Israel. A recent interview shed some light on that.
Think about this. The national symbol, let's say, of Hezbollah is a rifle. That's what's on their flag. The national symbol of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, is a sword. That's what's on their flag. The national symbol of Israel is the shield. It's the Star of David. The symbol of our people is not a weapon of war. It's an instrument of defense.
You hear that? The symbol of our people is a shield, showing he clearly has an ethno-religious identification with the state of Israel.
The thing that most embodies our entire ethos is not harming others. It's, again, creating a better world. This is fundamental to our tradition for thousands of years. And so the idea that our national anthem would be the Hatikva, would be the hope, I should say it's the Israel's national anthem.
Yep, oh, whoopsie, caught yourself making a bit of a boo-boo there. But look, in essence, I don't care if Jonathan Greenblatt loves Israel, loves his ancestors, wants the best for the future of his people. That's tribal, but it's the way human beings are. There's nothing really wrong with it. What bugs me is if a Westerner is to say the same thing, to include their own ancestors as our people and want the best for their nations, they're described as a Nazi, as pure evil, as someone who needs to be cancelled. And this is how many young people are starting to think. I'm sure some of them are anti-Semitic and full of hate or whatever, but I think many more of them aren't. They're just noticing the obvious hypocrisy in what is a very dangerous time for the Western world. And this is why we're seeing a lot of the sacred boomer liberal shibboleths being challenged. Many young people are starting to say, no, we're a people, recognising that doesn't mean we hate anybody else, we can wish them well, but we wish to survive and thrive. Similarly, it's not in our own interest to try and protect the ethno-religious interests of Israel. Now, I think the establishment right is going to have better arguments than, well, you're just an evil Nazi and an anti-Semite, because it's no different to what the left do when you say, well, you know, there's a problem with black crime. Oh, you're a racist. Islam tends to be quite violent. Oh, you're an Islamophobe. But as I say, it seems we're entering a new epoch. We can see that the geopolitical structure is shifting. National and civilizational mythologies are changing. Of course, that's not an excuse to start hating or being violent. We should look at the world through the eyes of compassion, love, wisdom, and justice. And through that, we should try and make sure that we don't get fed into the meat grinder ourselves. Anyway, this is a highly controversial topic, a highly complex one with no easy answers. I'll be interested in your thoughts below. Do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new.